So everybody's been talking about the casting of Lupita Nyong'o in the Odyssey, playing Helen of Troy. And what everybody's been talking about is race. And as we know, race is one of the defining issue of our times. But speaking of this from the point of view of acting, of casting a character, there's a whole lot more that's always going on. Now, when people talk about Helen of Troy, there's one defining characteristic that you got to have when you're casting Helen of Troy, and that is beauty. The people watching have got to believe that this war was caused over this woman. And in the history of casting this part, that's what you get. A series of either models or actresses famous for their beauty playing this part. But that's not all there is. I had a 6th grade teacher who, when we were studying world history, made a joke. The Trojan War went on for approximately 20 years. What did Helen look like at the end of this 20 years? Was she still the raving beauty that she was when the war started? What did Menelaus find when he, pulled her down from the walls of Troy? So let's very quickly go through everybody who I could find who has played Helen of Troy in a motion picture. I'm not counting TV, because I'm sure she showed up in Bewitched and Xena Warrior Princess, but I'm not talking about that. No, I'm only talking about movies. And I found 11. Their ages when they did it. So, Edie Darklea in 1924, she was 29. Maria Corda in 1927, she was 29. Rosanna Podesta in 1956, she was 22. Edie Vessel in 1961, she was 21. Yvonne Furneaux in 1964, she was 38. Elizabeth Taylor in 1967, she was 35. Irene Pappas in 1971, she was 42, the oldest of this group. In 1973, Krista Linder was 30. Sienna Guillory in 2003, she was 28. Diane Kruger in 2004, she was 28. That's the one with Brad Pitt. Troy is what it's called. Brad Pitt and Orlando Bloom. And then in 2018, Bella Dine was 30. There's been a push lately to cast opposite a famous actor of, let's say, 50, an actress of, let's say, 50. So the guy playing Menelaus, Helen's husband, is John Bernthal, who this year turns 50. They were not going to cast a 21-year-old Helen to play opposite John Bernthal. For that matter, Odysseus is played by Matt Damon, who this year turns 56. So having a 42 or 43-year-old Anne Hathaway play Penelope is pushing that about as far as they can. Of course, they're talking about Bronze Age Greece, and who knows what the standards were then, but the audience is 2026. So anybody casting about, looking for someone to play Helen of Troy, has got to confront this idea of age. It used to be that they would cast any leading man up to and past the age of roughly 80 with an actress who was around the age of 25. And that's just the way it was. And people, I don't know if they accepted it, but that's the way movies were made.
Oh, wait a minute, I take that back. Sean Connery is Monique's boyfriend. Now, he's 300 years old, but he's still a stud.
They could be 100 and like nothing but white spiders coming out, but they're...
And then that started to change around the same time that they started to find more opportunities for actors other than the usual suspects. And I'll tell you right now, there's a whole lot of people who don't like that idea. That is not what they are looking for when they go see a James Bond movie. They don't want to see Daniel Craig with an age-appropriate Bond girl. And then they get a scene like this.
But because of what happened to my husband, they meet tonight.
Why?
To choose a replacement.
That's Monica Bellucci, around the age of 50, playing a Bond girl. And you know what? She is extremely effective and plausible in the role. And when I say plausible, she is hot. So what does this mean for casting Helen of Troy? It means that you want somebody who is more or less age appropriate for whoever's playing Menelaus, her husband, or whoever's playing Paris, her paramour. Hollywood has always been extremely ageist against women actors. They very often are only casting them for their looks or what they consider their looks. And then they decide anytime after 40, well, those looks are gone. But stories keep on going. Stories keep on getting written. And every now and then, they've got stories that require a woman to be considered beautiful, to be considered desirable, but the story is that she is over 40. And there have always been certain actresses who get these parts. Marlene Dietrich was allowed to be beautiful and desirable after 40. In her case, after 50. Women like Lily Palmer, Jean Simmons, Sophia Loren. Am I saying that right? Is it Sophia Loren? Or Rita Hayworth, Anne Margaret, Myrna Loy.
I look terrible.
Helen Mirren. These and others were cast when they needed somebody over 40 who the audience would accept as still beautiful. So what they were looking for when casting Helen of Troy for this version of the Odyssey was an A-list star with some prestige, an Oscar wouldn't hurt, who is over 40, who the public will accept as still being ultra hot. Now, I'm not saying that Lupita Nyong'o was the only one who had all of these characteristics, but there's other things. There's things like just scheduling. Maybe she was available and somebody else was not. And there's one other major thing. In this version, they have cast Lupita Nyong'o not just as Helen of Troy, but also Helen's sister, Clytemnestra. Her twin sister, I should say, although I don't think the story ever indicated that they were identical twins, but they are twins, and who has proven herself handily playing twins, Lupita Nyong'o, in a little movie called Us. Now you might say, okay, they weren't twins, they were doppelgangers. But I think in the lore, the canon of Us, no, I guess they're clones. I can't remember actually. But she did it. She summoned two completely different energies to play those two different characters in Us. And whether or not you personally think Lupita Nyong'o is one of the great beauties of the world, you have to admit that the culture at large has accepted her that way. She has done advertising campaigns for major brands like Chanel and Lancôme. She's everywhere as a beauty, as a fashionable beauty, as a high-value, high-status beauty. All of these things feed into the way people are going to perceive her Helen of Troy. Also, let me point out, if people don't know, that this is not the first time that a black woman has been cast as Helen of Troy. And I'm not talking about some random production anywhere in the world. I'm talking about a big star in a major production directed by a major white director, presumably for a white audience. Eartha Kitt played Helen of Troy in 1950 when she was 22. This was not a movie. This was a stage production. But the stage production was directed by Orson Welles, one of the great movie directors of the 20th century. And the reason he cast Eartha Kitt, you'll know who Eartha Kitt is, don't you? She's most famous now for her voice work in The Emperor's New Groove. But she was also Catwoman in the 1960s TV series of Catwoman. She was one of 3 who played that part. But Orson Welles cast Eartha Kitt when she had just burst upon the entertainment scene. He said she was the most exciting woman alive. Now, I'll tell you, in 1950, there was no diversity, equity, and inclusion forcing Orson Welles to cast Eartha Kitt. He wanted to, and he wanted to because he wanted to do something that was a little bit different, that would shake things up, that would cause some excitement. And Eartha Kitt was the most exciting woman alive. But for the best analog to this Lupita Nyong'o controversy, you have to go back to 1961, and not a movie, not a play, but an opera, a production of Tannhäuser at the Bayreuth Festival. Now, the Bayreuth Festival in Germany is dedicated to the production of the operatic works of Richard Wagner. A man who, as a composer, took as his special topic the mythology of Germany, and as he saw it, the northern races, the white races. In this opera, Tannhäuser, appears the goddess Venus, the Roman goddess of love, Venus. And the grandson of Richard Wagner was at the time the director of the Bayreuth Festival, and he cast Grace Bumbry, one of the great 20th century sopranos, who was an African-American performer. But, as you might imagine, there was an outcry. There was a huge and furious outcry from the ticket buyers of Bayreuth. How can you cast a black woman in the role of Venus, especially in an opera by Wagner, who was known as, how shall I put this, a defender of the white races? Now, what Wagner's grandson said at the time was that he cast this woman because Venus was a goddess. She was not a mortal. She needed to be different, a whole, category different from everybody else in the opera. And he just thought, well, if I cast a black woman, and there's never been a black woman on the stage of the Bayreuth Festival, and probably even in a Wagner opera, it will certainly have that punch of something exciting, something otherworldly. And Grace Bumbry was, for that world, coming from a very different one. Well, she did it, and she was only 24, and I can't imagine the kind of steel nerves it must have taken. But when she was done, the audience there at Bayreuth gave her a 30-minute ovation, which means 42 separate curtain calls. That means they brought the curtain down 42 times and then brought it up, and she was there bowing to this amazing ovation. I guess the point there is, folks, wait until you see it. It was such a miraculous night, such an amazing cultural event. It would make a fantastic movie if anybody's watching who has any kind of pull or sway in that world. Okay, we are almost at the end of this video, and the YouTube analytics tells me that most of you have already clicked on to something else. So I think I have a little bit of room here to get just a little bit more abstract and intellectual, because if I think I understand correctly the arguments that the anti-Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy people are making, it's something along these lines, that the Iliad and the Odyssey are texts of Western civilization, of European civilization, and to cast somebody who is not European, which is to say white, as Helen of Troy, you are to some extent erasing that culture, which is so important to people of European descent. Okay, I think I understand, but I think that these people are missing something that might turn out to be very important to them, which is just this, that for a very long time, Hollywood, as a representative, as one of the most visible representatives of Western culture, has always treated Europe and mainly the United States as the sort of default civilization of planet Earth. And everything else is sort of hyphenated. But when the aliens come, they come to Washington, D.C. In other words, to some extent, for these people, Western culture is universal culture. But this argument that they're making about cultural erasure with Lupita Nyong'o is, in a very real sense, a renunciation of that cultural primacy. My point is, I think some of these people who are complaining about Lupita Nyong'o, who complained about the recent remake of Snow White and the recent remake of The Little Mermaid, I just don't think that they have thought this through to the end. If you want your culture to be world-conquering, then it's got to be universal. Now, I'm assuming that there is a kind of logic behind this argumentation. That might not be the case. It might be a purely emotional response. I do hope that everybody remembers that we are talking about show business. This is not science. This is not mathematics. I admit that the cultural impact of these movies and things is incredibly important. As they say, representation matters, and it matters to a whole bunch of different people for different reasons. But the process that creates these cultural artifacts is idiotic and insane and chaotic and full of 1,000 kinds of bullshit. So,
truthful Parson Brown, living in a southern town, for doing good and talking good, he was known around. He had a most peculiar way of preaching on the Sabbath day.